Hello, dear friends and adventurers. It's Rob, the D&D wannabe, here with some exciting news. This podcast is now made possible in partnership with our good friends at Misty Mountain Gaming. Veteran-owned and operated, Misty Mountain is one of the largest dice companies in the world. They offer the widest selection of metal, gemstone, and glass dice combined. For yourself, that special role player in your life, or your favorite podcast hosts. Just saying. Look for their booth at your next local comic, anime, or gaming convention, or find their products at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show.
Deedle-dum-dum, deedle-dum-dum, deedle-dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He'd duck and cover, duck and cover. He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Be sure to remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must learn to do the same thing. That's what this episode is all about. Bert is a very, very careful fellow. Even having his natural armor, Bert knows that a turtle can never be too careful when he's on an adventure. Whenever there's danger, this is the way he keeps from being hurt. Sometimes it even saves his life. So the next time you and your friends are out there rolling for initiative, think of your old friend Bert the Turtle, and don't forget to
duck and cover.
Greetings, listeners and fellow adventurers. Thanks for coming back for another episode of Bardic Twinspiration. It's me, your host, Steven, once again, joined today by my very own simulacrum, Rob.
Hi, I'm D&D wannabe, aka Rob, Steve's twin brother, also host of this show.
Today, we're going to be discussing how to make your combats more interesting and varied, but this time not by changing how the NPCs behave, but rather by varying the setting and the situation surrounding that combat.
You know, when I think back to combats that I have been a part of, or that I've run across my tenure as a dungeon master, the things that stand out to me the most are not the creatures that I fought, normally because, you know, I'm still playing and running mostly at low levels, and the kinds of creatures that you encounter can be standard.
Yeah.
You know, it's, oh, I fought orcs that one time, or I fought orcs that other time, or how about that time that we fought those orcs? But when you change up the environment or the atmosphere of the fight, it can really set an encounter apart and make it much more memorable.
So, I've run, as we discussed previously, one campaign in D&D 5e, that being the Lost Mines of Phandelver. Let me just say, there are a lot of goblins and hobgoblins and bugbears in that game. There are plenty of other things. There are some human thugs. There are some twig blights, which I'll never fought.
There's some zombies.
It's a couple of zombies, yeah. There's a dragon that also you never fought. Some spiders.
A Nothic.
Yeah, like one flaming skull. I'm not going to spoil every monster that's in there. I mean, you know there's a dragon because it's on the cover. And what is a low-level adventure without goblins? But yeah, by the time I was done, pretty tired of running goblins.
So to me, you can fight the same kind of monster over and over again, and you're probably going to.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like in the Lost Mines of Phandelver, when we were taking on a goblin gang.
Right.
So it had goblins, it had hobgoblins, it had bugbears, like you were saying. But the one thing that was different across every encounter that we played was no two combats took place in the same place.
Right. They did a good job of varying that up a little bit, and we are going to give you some more ideas about how you can do the same thing. Reusing the same type of monster or the same type of enemy in general isn't inherently wrong. It does kind of help to build a theme for a certain arc. Critical Role had several episodes that were Knowles, 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 and then they had some episodes...
regular Knoll.
Yeah, regular Knoll. But they had a whole arc that was designed around fighting dragons. And you can do more to add some variety to your combats. You can, of course, change the monsters. Like you said, you can also change the environment.
Yeah, the venue.
But you can also change the circumstances surrounding that combat. You can add in primary or secondary objectives that are not actually combat related. And we're going to be discussing a few of those.
All right, well, where do you want to start?
Let me see. Let's talk about Vision.
Okay. He was really cool in the Avengers. He got with Scarlet Witch. I'm super happy for him. He got his own spinoff. It's on Disney+.
You ruined the joke about visibility and lighting conditions.
Sorry.
Oh, well. For those of you who could see what I was going for there, let's talk about light and how it works in D&D 5e. Take it away, Rob.
Right, so unless you're going for a certain kind of archetype here, your character can see, provided there's light in Dungeons & Dragons.
It's often the case.
Right. When there is light, they can see well. When there is dim light or weaker lighting conditions or ambient light, they can see less well. Not as good. And while many races in Dungeons & Dragons have dark vision, a limited capacity to see when light is absent, some races are just out of luck when the lights go out.
Right. And the different stages of light to darkness actually have a pretty significant impact on your character's ability to see and perceive the world around them. And I feel like dark vision is usually just taken to be a hand wave, which is to say that if there is imperfect lighting conditions, I can see just fine in them. But it doesn't actually work that way. So let's talk a little bit about dim light, because that is the intermediate stage. There is full light, there is dim light, and there is total darkness. Now, in D&D 5e, where it gets a little bit muddy is how dim light works and how dark vision affects your ability to perceive in dim light and darkness. So, I guess we should talk about what actually constitutes dim light. So that would be a shadowed area, a twilight or dusk setting outdoors, or shadows like moving below the shadow of the mountain or walking down an alleyway at dusk. This is a time where you would not be in full light, but you would still be able to see to an extent. The condition that it uses in D&D 5e is actually referred to as lightly obscured, and that has some mechanical implications.
It does. I would also say that dim light could be ambient light or refracted light or indirect light. Like there is a source of bright light around the corner and you're in another hallway, or it's a starlit night or it's a cloudy night and you're not getting the full effects of that light source wherever it is that you are. In circumstances like this, the big tell is that you have disadvantage on perception checks. It is mechanically twice as hard to see things.
This can also take effect when your characters are seeing through a hazy fog situation or something like that. It gives them disadvantage on those perception checks. Another interesting place that this will occur is if your characters are traveling in darkness and they opt to use a light via a spell or a torch, candle, lantern, etc. Every light source will add bright light in a certain radius and dim light in a certain radius. You should, as a DM, make a distinction between those two. Remember that just because that torch is shining light, what is it, like 60 feet? 30 feet of that is bright, and the rest of it, however far it actually is considered dim light. So your characters do not have perfect vision in the dim light radius. And I know that you're going to tell me in a second what the actual distance is.
Yeah, it's 20 feet of bright light and 20 feet of dim light for a torch.
Oh, man. I think I'd been using
much.
that wrong. Suffice to say that is where dark vision comes in. if your character has dark vision, they can see in dim light as though it were full light.
Mm-hmm.
They are completely unimpaired where they can see at all to the end of the dim light.
They used to call that low light vision in older editions. If it was dim, then you could see as though you were in bright light.
So don't think that dark vision is not going to help you out just because you're above ground during the day. No, that will help you see down that alleyway to see if someone is lurking in the shadows, where any other member of your party would actually have disadvantage on that check. I don't feel like dim light is taken advantage of much by DMs, but you can use that to give your players that have dark vision an added benefit and to increase a little bit of the realism, give your sneaky NPCs a fighting chance.
Right. So dark vision takes darkness to low light and low light to bright light. And since so many races in 5th edition get dark vision now, understanding exactly how that works is incredibly important. Now, you and I have kind of an advantage on bringing this into our games well, since we play online.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a lot easier on a virtual tabletop like Roll20 to curate lighting and darkness and what you can and can't see as a particular character.
Right. Someday we're going to talk about that and all the advantages that you get by playing online, and some of the disadvantages that come along with it. But the ability to use a system of dynamic lighting like they have on Roll20 can be a big boon, and it can be very immersive.
I remember when I was playing as a halfling in my uncle's campaign, the one that you brought up before and that I brought up before. We were beginning the Tomb of Annihilation campaign, and we went into a temple in Port Nyanzaru. It was the Temple of Joaquin that we were in. And my party ran off into what I perceived as the darkness. They kept describing these enemies and these actions they were taking, and I was staring at effectively a black screen in front of me.
Right, because Roll20 gives you the perspective that your player has, and if your character can't see in darkness, neither can you, the player.
Right, and there were just these little motes of like sconces, these little motes of torchlight that nobody was around, and I was trying to avoid them too, lest I should be seen. And the other players asked me where I was and what I was doing, and my uncle turned to them and said, "You gotta remember, Rob is playing an entirely different game than you are right now, because you can see things and he cannot." And that kind of struck me, that I should be playing an entirely different game from them.
Mm-hmm.
They have a power that I don't have, that in every campaign I had played before that moment, I was just playing the same game as everyone else. I had the same information as a player and as a character that everyone else did. And it was more fun playing it straight. That made that encounter extremely memorable for me.
Right, because the sensory deprivation that you experienced as a player was immersive to the circumstances that your character was undergoing. And I think I made a comment earlier that might have struck some people wrong, might have rubbed them the wrong way.
I think you make those all the time.
Which is where I said that we can give a little boon to those guys who have dark vision by removing the disadvantage that they would normally have to see in dim light. And I know a lot of people out there are thinking, dark vision is one of the most powerful starting traits that a race can have. Why do we need to be throwing these guys a bone? And I think it's because not enough DMs give characters with dark vision disadvantage to see in darkness, which is what they should be doing, because those characters that have dark vision are perceiving in this darkness as though it were dim light, not as though it were full light.
It's not a get out of jail free card. It's
right.
Still, it is no substitute for actual light.
And I have always remembered this since I was first introduced to dark vision. I don't think anyone else ever really even gives it the time of day. But when a character has dark vision, they perceive darkness as dim light in grayscale.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot perceive color in darkness unless you have a special ability or feat or invocation that would allow you to do so. Shout out to Devil's Sight for Warlocks, and True Sight for all those, bad A NPCs out there.
That's kind of a odd but fun flavor thing. Like, I can't actually imagine many cases where that would really benefit or hinder you. That's not true. I can imagine some.
It could be interesting in a few. Let's say that you have two factions that are fighting each other in the dark, and you cannot see anyone's banners. Like, you can't see anyone's colors. By colors, I mean, like their heraldry. So you just got a bunch of guys in armor fighting and, don't know which side is which. I've never been in that combat, but I could see it being great.
I could see having a vial of a red healing potion and an identical vial of a green poison potion.
Oh, yeah. And
pulling them both out of your bag in a dark room where you're trying to poison an enemy ambassador. Like, which one? I can't.
Yeah. It might make identifying those alchemical components a little bit more difficult if you're doing so in a dark elf lab.
In my defense, a lot of your poisons look the same. You might want to think about relabeling some of them.
Such a good movie.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how you might actually use this in combat. And what immediately springs to mind is the very first combat encounter that we experienced in the campaign that you are currently running for me. So talk to me about setting that up, and then I'll talk a little bit about what it was like to be in that fight.
So I was given a gift in that half my party can't see in the dark. And again, with as many races in 5th edition as can see in the dark with dark vision, this is kind of a unicorn situation. The very first thing that y'all had to do to get the campaign off the ground was go find a Fire Giant King's stolen golden hoard that some kobolds had taken down into these mines. And I knew that kobolds were ingenious little trap makers, and that they had dark vision, and that they thought that servants of the fire giants would be coming down after them, presumably. And the fire giants' servants were not creatures that had dark vision, and they considered that an advantage. So I thought, how can I weaponize light?
And this was a thought that you had as soon as we handed over our character sheets? You're like, oh, only 2 of them have dark vision. I don't know when I'm going to get to do this again.
It wasn't an immediate thought. It was an immediate thought when I was looking at kobolds versus your party. So what I did was I took these choke points in the mine tunnels, these intersections that could be seen from a distance away within sling range and within scorching ray range, and put little lanterns there so that as creatures approached these choke points, which they would be obliged to do, or investigated the lanterns, these helpful little islands of light in my dark tunnels, that the kobolds, who were hiding in the darkness beyond the light, completely unseen by the party, would have an opportunity to make advantaged attacks from hidden places at targets who were clearly visible because they were standing next to a source of bright light. And that was a fun time for me. I hope it was a fun time for y'all, as rocks came flying out of the darkness to assail the first person that set foot next to one of those lanterns.
Oh yeah, our rogue almost died right away as the person who was leading the way. As one of the 2 characters that had dark vision, I had a great time. I don't know, whatever. I could feel their pain, though. But it did a lot for me to feel like, hey, you know what? My dark vision is important right now.
It sure was. You wound up being a spotter for the group.
We ended up having one of our wizards cast light on a stone and just throw it further and further into the cave to be able to allow our human combatants a chance to fire their crossbows and charge with their spears at the kobolds who were hiding behind stalagmites. Like, one of the reasons that was an interesting encounter is we did not know how many enemies we were up against.
Yeah.
We did not know if this was an encounter where we should charge in or an encounter where we should run until someone cast light and threw it further in. But I think that is a great example of how you can use light, whether you're weaponizing it or not. Because let's face it, if you are fighting in the dark and you are running dim light and darkness correctly, with the disadvantage on perception checks and the inability to target enemies that you can't see and things like that, a party that does not have dark vision front to back is going to have to compensate for that. That is going to mean that your wizard is going to have to cast light. That is going to change the types of spells that they can cast in that encounter. If you don't have someone casting light or dancing lights or something like that. So dancing lights is a concentration spell, and that's going to allow pretty much the whole party to see, but it's going to handicap one of your spellcasters. Light is not a concentration spell, but that's going to be basically affixing a torch in a singular area, a magical source of light in a spot.
Or putting it on one of your allies and letting them carry it around.
Right, there you go. Or you can have someone carry a torch, and that is the solution where you give up a hand in order to take the light with you. And that changes the weapons or the types of attacks that your melee classes or I guess really your martial classes at large are able to use.
Right, because who holds the torch at that point? Do you give it to the fighter? That could be... They could use that hand for a shield, a second weapon, or for a two-handed weapon. Do you give it to the rogue? No, the rogue wants to be hiding. They don't need to be your source of light. Do you give it to the wizard? Well, the wizard should be in the back, so what's he really lighting up for you if he's the one with the light? It brings an element of tactics and strategy and cost-benefit analysis before the fight really gets started.
Right. Let's say you have two factions in the combat, either your player characters and their opponents, neither of whom have dark vision. The light spell is a great solution because no one loses concentration, no one takes up their hands, but whoever you put that on is the target. Hands down. So then it becomes a tactical discussion of who do you cast this on?
On the paladin's shield.
Yep.
Every time on the front liner's shield or breastplate or something such as that. Something that's going to be out in front of them.
And you, as the caster, are deciding this guy's the pincushion. This guy's the meat shield. So that the rest of us can live. And that is the most effective way to do it in a lot of situations. But, you know, your paladin might not be excited about that. But something as simple as manipulating and limiting the presence, sources, and availability of light in a combat has huge implications on the strategy that your player characters are going to have to employ. And that's the theme of this episode. We're going to keep talking about more and more ways to do that. Anything else we want to say on light before we move on?
Just that, you know, I think there are a lot of power fantasies that go into playing Dungeons and Dragons. You know, if you're going to be a monk, you kind of want to be Jackie Chan. You know, if you want to be an assassin, you want to be Ezio or Altair. If you
want to be an archer, you want to be Legolas. Are we just doing examples, or is it specifically?
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think one of those is the Batman archetype.
Yep.
You know, throwing the batarang and breaking the light bulbs in the room, casting your enemies into darkness, rushing in where you have the advantage with your night vision goggles, or, you know, in this case, dark vision, and taking people out and popping in and out of pockets of light to instill terror and fear into the hearts of your enemies. That kind of thing is impossible if you aren't, as either the player or the DM, preferably a collaboration of the two, using light and its effects to full advantage.
Right. And, you know, a lot of people have probably had to use the light spell in combat to make up for their party's shortcomings in the dark vision area. So you kind of are able to utilize the light spell in combat. You're kind of able to weaponize it in a way. But the reverse also gives you a chance to use some other spells. Like, have you ever considered weaponizing prestidigitation by removing someone's source of light, because one of the abilities is to snuff a flame or something like that. And then, if your party has dark vision and the opponents don't, you've just given them, at minimum, disadvantage on their perception checks, or possibly you've given your entire party full cover until someone uses their action to relight that torch.
Or a full cover equivalent. You're making them untargetable.
Right. Hey, I got ahead of myself because I started talking about cover.
Which is a good segue, yeah. Let's talk about cover.
Yeah, we're talking about your ability to see your opponent and how that has implications on your ability to hit them. That is exactly what cover is.
So, this is one of my favorite mechanics in 5th edition because they so elegantly streamlined it. And yet, at least in the games that I play in, I feel it is, I wouldn't say it's underutilized, because at least in my uncle's game, it's utilized, and it's utilized to great effect, but it's not utilized enough.
You mean by the players. You mean the players are not taking advantage of it.
By the players, by the monsters, by everybody. This is such a powerful tool that should be common sense for us, because if we were to get into combat situations in real life, cover would be priority 1.
Right. And, it is. And in fact, a lot of video games will emulate this, such as Call of Duty. Cover is very important. Gears of War, you spend the entire game hiding behind something.
Mm-hmm. I really like the Uncharted series. It's so fun and cinematic and immersive. And Nathan Drake dives behind cover just as much as Marcus Phoenix does.
So let's talk about what it means to have cover mechanically, and then you can tell us how we should be using it.
Sure.
So there's a couple of different stages of cover in D&D 5e. There is half cover, 3/4 cover, and full cover.
And arguably no cover.
Oh, of course, yeah. The default situation, whereby it's kind of like light. Like, you don't define what light is.
Yeah, the game assumes you have no cover unless you have some cover.
Yeah, you define what it is once it begins to change the way the mechanics of the game work. So give me some examples of half cover.
Okay, so half cover, kind of as it sounds, should represent covering about half of a character's mass.
Of course.
So the classic example from Uncharted and from Gears of War is they call it a chest-high wall. Mm-hmm. It's something that you could crouch down behind and have full cover if you were going prone behind them. A low wall, as you might find alongside of a street in a little burg or hamlet. A flipped-over table in the bar would also work. Mm-hmm. Maybe a narrow tree trunk, if you were to split it vertically instead of horizontally. Or another creature in the combat. Just having someone in your way as you are in the dance of combat could be covering your body about halfway in any given moment.
Right. Either vertically or horizontally. It's when only about half of your body would be visible. And the mechanical implication of that is that you get a +2 bonus to your AC and dexterity saving throws, which I think is the only time, correct me if I'm wrong because I haven't read everything, the only time in D&D 5e where you get a numerical bonus, a situational numerical bonus.
I am willing to go out and say that's correct. There are class abilities and proficiencies and spells and magic items that give you a hand, or even Bless would let you roll a die, but a consistent, reliable, flat number that anybody has access to, that's it.
Yeah, and they used to have this stuff all the time in Pathfinder. Everything was a +2 or a +5 or a +10 or something like that. But D&D 5e tends to go for add a D4 or get advantage or get disadvantage on something. But this is basically the equivalent of holding a shield while retaining the use of both your hands. Or let's say you do have a shield. It's like having 2 shields.
And still having a hand left for your weapon.
Ah, yes, it's the paladin's dream. You get the animated shield before you get the animated shield.
Not every class has proficiency with shields. But everybody can go hide behind Nana's armchair.
Yeah, or go hide behind Nana.
Everybody can stand behind that upturned cart, or the bar table that's been turned over, or jump over the bar and have half cover. Anybody can grab a +2 to your AC. It takes the Shield of Faith spell for you to find a +2 to your AC through magic. And someone's got to concentrate on that. Or you can jump behind the bar. I mean, it's great. Anybody can do it.
Right.
Everybody should do this.
That's just standing behind the bar. Now, if you were to, say, get low and crouch down behind the bar, you might increase that to 3/4 cover.
Or, stand behind something more significant, like, I think the player's handbook says, like a larger tree trunk, or behind a portcullis, or I imagine, how some wooden doors will have those bars going through it at some point so you can kind of see through. That's 3/4 cover.
Yeah, or an arrow slit in like the battlement in the turret walls or something like that.
Yeah, anything that you could technically still hit someone behind there, but man, is it harder. And oh boy, do they give you a good bonus for that. Yeah, sure, you can still be hit, but with a +5 added to your AC. A +5, Steven. That's a big number.
Yep. That is the equivalent of the shield spell, which I think we talked about. I discovered just a few weeks ago. I used it for the first time in a game and enjoyed the benefits thereof. But the shield spell only lasts a round. You can pop in and out of 3/4 cover whenever you can find something that would provide it.
Yeah. And, I mean, that's the wonderful thing about cover is, again, anybody can use it.
The wonderful thing about cover is cover's a wonderful thing.
Again, you get that to your AC and to your saving throws. Nothing gives you a +5 to your dexterity saving throws unless you are standing next to a paladin with 20 charisma and he's got that aura on. Right? The aura of protection, I think. Is that what it's called?
I don't remember the name of
You're
it,
the
but I've had
paladin
it
guy.
once and it was glorious. Yeah, the low-level paladin guy. Sadly. But it doesn't stop there. No. The +5 bonus to AC and dexterity saving throws, which I feel like we kind of are glossing over that. The dexterity saving throw boost is really big.
It's the most common saving throw to spare you damage in this game.
Right. So your wizard is going to be super excited about that AC bonus, but your paladin is going to be real excited about that dexterity saving throw bonus, because typically that's the way the DM gets around that corner. That's the way you get around the shield wall, is you cast a couple fireballs.
Yeah. Your rogue's probably going to beat that saving throw anyway, and with evasion take no damage. But if you want to never have to worry about it as a rogue, you hide behind something. And you're probably back there anyway because you're trying to be stealthy. So, yeah, it's great benefit that everybody should be taking. And again, stacks with everything. Your mage, your wizard that you were mentioning a second ago, has probably got mage armor on because they're a good wizard.
Mm-hmm.
So they're getting that bump to their AC. Then maybe the cleric casts Shield of Faith on them. Extra 2 to their AC. They're standing behind 3/4 cover. +5 to their AC. And if something is going to come in and hit that, let's say that the wizard in that circumstance has a 21 AC, then they cast the shield spell. And then they get an extra +5. A 26 AC on your wizard. Nothing's hitting that guy.
Yep.
Nothing.
You've surpassed what? Every monster in the classic monster manual except for the Tarrasque? Wait, the Tarrasque is even lower than that, isn't it?
I think that's right.
Oh, make me look stuff up, why don't you? All right, let's see.
Ooh, I don't know the Tarrasque AC off the top of my head.
The Tarrasque AC is 25.
There you go.
A wizard with 3/4 cover can exceed the Tarrasque's AC under the right circumstances with the correct bonuses. But 3/4 cover is not where it ends. You can also enjoy total cover. And I think total cover is a little bit more self-explanatory. I don't think that it gets glossed over as much. That is when your opponent cannot see you at all. That doesn't mean you're hiding in the window. That means you shut the window.
Total cover is required for stealth. I think that's the main thing that people use it for, is you have to break line of sight to be able to stealth and to be targeted at all, right? If you can't see the opponent, you can't take opportunity attacks, you can't target them with anything that requires a roll to hit. They can still be included in area of effect magic, but that's pretty much the only thing they can be hit by.
Yeah, full cover is not to be underestimated. It is it is there to keep you alive. Hide behind the boulder, break line of sight, get an opportunity to stealth if you're a rogue, prevent the enemy from targeting you. Stepping around a corner or closing a door in the dungeon means that until that barrier is passed, you are practically invincible. The only thing that can beat you is movement.
So let's put this in terms of spells, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to duplicate the bonus given to you by standing behind a piece of furniture, you would need to cast the Shield of Faith spell,
right,
which is a first level spell that requires concentration and takes your action to cast. Or you go stand behind some furniture.
Right. And in order to mimic the +5 to AC that you would get from having 3/4 cover, that you could get from peeking around a door or looking through that arrow slit to make your attacks, you would have to cast the shield spell,
yep,
which only lasts for a round and takes a first level spell slot.
First level spell slot and your reaction for the turn.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I hadn't even thought about the economy cost of that.
And to have full cover, to be unseen, magically the equivalent to that is the invisibility spell, which is concentration, takes your action to cast, and is a second level spell slot. Or you could shut a door.
Right. And there is no equivalent for getting the +5 to your dexterity saving throws. This is exclusively a thing that a player can provide their character with by being creative with their movement.
And by using the environment to their advantage. So why are we sleeping on this?
Right.
D&D players around the world, why aren't you using cover?
Right. And DMs, make sure that you provide some cover whenever you're designing your combat encounters. Give that to your creative players as a reward for interacting with the environment, and importantly, make sure that your NPCs that they're fighting have access to it as well, because just using light and cover well can make a party of 5 adventurers fighting 3 kobolds from a very, very easy encounter to a nerve-wracking and deadly encounter.
Oh, man. I've needed someone to listen to me talk about cover for a while. That was a little soapbox for me.
But it doesn't stop there. We still have a lot of different points to cover on how we can change up combat to make it a little bit more varied and require a little bit more strategy from our players.
So yeah, when you're designing that room for your next encounter, throw some furniture in there for folks to hide behind. Throw some pillars to support the room structurally, and also give the goodies and the baddies something to kind of hide behind and poke themselves around. Or a railing on like a stairwell or on a balcony or something.
Right. Don't just have your players fighting outdoors on a plain. Give them some trees. Give them some crumbling remains of enormous statues or a thicket that they can jump behind.
Which, if we're talking about trees being there or banisters on stairwells and balconies and stuff, climb that tree. Go up those stairs. Go up to that balcony. We tend to think two-dimensionally when we are playing D&D because a lot of us have a map that we draw on, or a map that we bought at a store, or a Roll20 map that is, on a 2D plane. But a little verticality can add a new dimension. Literally? See
Yeah.
what I did there?
Yep.
To your combats.
A third dimension, yeah. I admit that most of my games have been on Roll20, which is exclusively two-dimensional. It is very difficult to think about elevation. It's not impossible to do, but your mind looking at your screen on that two-dimensional map does not automatically think, can I get above or below someone? So it was really interesting to me when I started watching Critical Role to see Matt Mercer pull out his little clear adjustable height standees and start incorporating that into his combats. Like, my mind was blown. I thought, if I ever, like, I cannot run a game in real life unless I have these things, because it just added such a great new element to the campaign, because now not only can you move in two directions, like the points of a compass, you can now have the high ground.
Something, just to try and save you some money, that we did when I started playing at tabletops, because you and I haven't played a lot of tabletop play together when I've been running, but you go to a con or you order online a little Chessex set of dice. They come in these like 4-inch high plastic clear boxes.
Oh yeah.
And when you stack a couple of those on top of each other, you can put a little mini or a little token on top of them.
Oh no, I threw all of those away. I'll have to break it.
No, man, you gotta save those.
I gotta break it to my wife. I'm gonna have to buy some more dice.
But yeah, that's not really what we're talking about, is ways to save money.
Right, let's talk about how elevation can change up your combat and require some more strategy.
So one of the things that really inspired me to start thinking about this was when I played through Divinity the Original Sin 2. Wonderful, wonderful game made by Larian Studios. I really cannot recommend it enough for either fans of RPGs, for fans of open world storytelling, and for just inspiration. But they have a mechanic in their game that rewards ranged attackers having a height advantage, an elevation advantage over their foes. It gives them extra range to their weapon attacks and spell attacks, and it does increased damage, and it makes them more difficult to target from down below. And even though D&D doesn't have those same mechanics worked into it, it kind of got my wheels turning. Like, yeah, we should be looking for the high ground in combat situations. You know, take a page out of Obi-Wan's handbook. It really is a key advantage, and it's something that if I were in a real life situation, I would be looking for, like, much like the cover. I would be looking to be behind cover if I was in a combat situation in real life. I would be looking for the elevation if I was in a combat situation in real life. Why am I not doing it in D&D?
Right, and you mentioned that there's no mechanical advantage baked into 5e for having the high ground. But if you think about a combat where you are below your opponent, they do not present as large of a target for you. Like, if you are directly below someone, looking straight up at them, all you're going to see is their feet, and they present more and more of a target the closer to the same plane they are as you. So I would argue that if someone has a sufficient amount of high ground, whether or not they're standing behind something, they should enjoy the benefits of partial cover. I may not take that beyond a +2, but that is a very logical step for me that will really reward your players for, planning ahead and setting that ambush, or taking the time to use their movement tactically to put themselves in an advantageous position.
Sure. I'm imagining, I don't know why I'm imagining this, but I'm imagining a fight in a ballroom where we have an archer on a balcony, and he has a clear view of everybody below him, but folks looking up at him past that railing have not as good a view of him. And so, yeah, he would maybe get a few points of cover. And depending on the game I was playing and the group I was with, I think I might even consider giving a character in that situation advantage on their attack roll, if position is truly an advantageous one.
Right. But elevation can also do some other things for you, because fall damage is a thing in 5e.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very fun thing in 5e.
The Kiki killer.
Oh, yeah. Do you think that's the whole reason that Marisha played a monk when she went for campaign 2, so that she wouldn't have to worry about fall damage?
I don't think it hurt.
I'm sure it came up.
Yeah.
So let's say that you and your opponent, I don't know if I'm talking about you as an PC or an NPC right now, but let's say you have a player character and an NPC that are fighting on some scaffolding or across some rooftops or battlements. There is going to be the opportunity to fall off of those, maybe if you fail a check to stay on. But the thing that I really like about it is that it incentivizes the characters to take actions in combat that I don't see them take very often under other circumstances, like, the grapple, the push, in order to remove an enemy from a combat by pushing them off the edge of a cliff, or at the very least by knocking them off the rooftop so that they are now prone 2 stories down, having taken some fall damage.
That was a big moment in Critical Role Campaign 1. Hotus takes Vax'Ildon to the top of a tower and betrays him, in a way, disguised as a friend of Vax's, and shanks the guy, and then they go over that balcony together to the courtyard far below.
Sure, full-on Disney villained him.
Yeah, what a great moment in that campaign, because first of all, I mean, it was a very dramatic reveal, but second of all, a lot of damage just kind of out the gate.
Mm-hmm.
It separated them from backup, from help from the rest of the party. And that moment would not have been nearly so dramatic, satisfying, or memorable if this all took place on the same floor of the castle.
Right. If you haven't seen the pattern here in my interest in these different aspects that you can add into your combat, it's I enjoy, as a player, being put in a position where the optimal thing for me to do is not cut and dried, and it is not the same thing that I did last turn.
Or last combat, or last session.
Sure, yeah. I have been in a lot of 20-foot by 20-foot flat square rooms. And, 30-foot by 30-foot flat round rooms, going through dungeons and things like that. And sure, they might have atmospheric elements, like in the Lost Mines of Phandelver. The final dungeon in that campaign has an ever-present sound element that makes it distinct from other dungeons in that campaign. And it has some water here and there, which, limits some of the area that you can walk through. A couple of stalagmites to provide cover, but for the most part, it's a lot of rooms. So, as someone who's played a lot of warlocks, it's easy to just sit back and throw Eldritch Blast at things. Okay, I'm going to throw Eldritch Blast at this guy over here on the left. Next turn, I'm going to throw Eldritch Blast at this guy over here on the right. But adding in some elements from light, cover, or elevation where, maybe the optimal thing for me to do this round is to cast light, or maybe that'll take away some of the disadvantages that the rest of my party's having to deal with. Or maybe the optimal thing for me to do in this combat is to run up and try my odds at pushing the goblin off the edge of the scaffolding before he has a chance to pull that chain that's going to set off a trap somewhere. Or maybe this is my opportunity to grapple the enemy that's trying to escape, rather than just constantly shoot him in the back. We might need to take him alive.
As a dungeon master who runs several campaigns for different people, or sometimes the same people, they might be getting used to my GMing style, or the way that I run goblins, or whatnot. I want to make encounters memorable.
Mm-hmm.
I want to increase the variety and make them feel distinct and different from the one before. Like you said, you've been in a lot of 20 by 20 foot featureless rooms in your time.
Yes, I have.
And I hate that for you. Because, kind of as like we said at the beginning, the element that can bring the most variety into your combats, into your encounters, is venue. And presenting you with opportunities that you didn't have in the combat before. And changing up the environment, or aspects of the environment, or the atmosphere, or the lighting, can make all the difference in the world between your warlock wanting to cast Eldritch Blast, or do something unusual. Do something like pushing, like hiding.
Like dodging or disengaging.
Yeah, like dodging, disengaging, taking the help action, dashing because they have to. These kind of things excite me as a dungeon master and excite me as a player. When a player is excited by a wealth of opportunities before them. That's a thing that we look for in video games, is I can approach this situation my way. I don't have to do it the game's way. Right? That's something that made the Just Cause series extremely memorable. and Skyrim very memorable, is that there were multiple solutions to every problem, and D&D needs to be that way. Not every problem calls for a fireball, or an Eldritch Blast, or just swinging my sword.
Right. So that's one of the reasons that, like, say, playing Super Mario Brothers frustrates me, because there's one solution to this problem, and you can do it very well and very fast, or you can do it very slowly. But if you're going to cross this chasm, you need to jump off of this Koopa shell and onto this moving platform with just the right timing.
Don't play Mario Maker.
So we have a couple more ways, and in fact, you said something that makes me very excited to bring up another point, but it's going to have to wait until next time because we've run out of time for today. Don't worry, this conversation is not over. I've got at least this many points to make in the next episode, where we're not going to talk as much about the environment, but about the circumstances of the combat, and some little things that you as a DM can drop in to really shake things up and make your players sit and think, because that's what excites me as a player, is not just the confusion and the perplexion about what is the thing that is best for me as a character to do right now, but also to engage me as a player and to get me thinking strategically about how I can, because I think I've said before that I do not like puzzles in D&D.
And yet you come back to my games.
But I enjoy puzzles in combat.
Yeah.
I enjoy puzzles in combat. Like, it's having something other than killing the enemy in front of me that I have to accomplish. And how am I going to do that with all these enemies around?
I think this episode, we've talked a lot about leveraging the mechanics of 5th edition to make your combats more varied and therefore more interesting. But when we come back, we'll be talking about how you as the Dungeon Master, and I think it will be mostly the Dungeon Master's responsibility for this next episode, can leverage your own creativity, kind of like I was saying before, specifically to make your combats memorable and very unique and distinct from situations that your characters have been in before. Give them something entirely new and out of the box.
I am very excited to go ahead and jump right into recording this next episode, but unfortunately, you as a listener will have to wait for us to finish editing it.
Sucks to be you, listener.
But until then, don't worry, you won't be completely without us. We do have a Discord, which I'm going to put the link to in the description of this episode, where you can come and interface with us directly. You can also find more of Rob's comments online.
Right. I am a Dungeons & Dragons content creator. You can find me at D&D Wannabe on Twitter. I've also written articles for Misty Mountain Gaming's Dungeon feed, my little contributions to Dungeon Master philosophy and player advice. And I've also written an adventure that maybe you and your group might enjoy going through. It's called Dust in the Water, and it is now available on Misty Mountain Gaming's shop.
And don't forget that you can also find us on social media. Links in the description. And we'll look forward to seeing you there while we wait for this next episode. We'll catch you then. The outro music you're listening to right now is called Mega Epic, and the intro music is called Super Epic. Both were composed by the wonderfully talented Alexander Nakarada and utilized under a Creative Commons license. You can find more of his music at serpentsoundstudios.com. If you enjoyed our content, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review on your listening app of choice. To keep up with us on social media, look us up on facebook.com/Bardic Twinspiration and on Twitter @BTwinspiration. Want to interact with us directly? Come join our Discord. After all, who are we if not people who are willing to roll the dice on making some new friends? Links in the description. Come check it out.
So you know that people are going to get on to us for saying full light instead of bright light for like this entire episode, right?